So let's look at Exodus 20. We're going to read 8 through 11. Exodus 20, if you'll turn with me. So in the Ten Commandments, God established a Sabbath day of rest. Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work. So if you think he was kidding about this, if you think he was just saying it to say it, we're going to look at Exodus 31, 12 through 17, where it says, And the Lord said to Moses, You are to speak to the people of Israel and say, Above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it's holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Therefore, the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So here we can see God emphasizing his seriousness. God not only repeats the commandment to keep the Sabbath, but he says whoever does work on it shall be put to death twice in this passage. So does anyone in here not understand the commandment to the people of Israel? I think it's pretty clear. And if you look at Numbers 15, there was a stick collector who went out and collecting sticks on the Sabbath day, and they took him into custody, and they took him and stoned him to death. So this was not a joke. And if you look right there around Numbers 15, they also, God told them to put tassels on their garments to remind them not to break the commandments. So they put tassels on their clothes. So then in verse 17, God says it's a sign forever between me and the people of Israel. So why did God take this so seriously? What was so important about the day of rest? I'm sorry? Typical of heaven? Okay. Tells of the relationship with God. Yeah, it's, God is a jealous God. He wants us to worship him. We know that all through Scripture. He wants to be the one and only God. So he gave them a day and said, take this day of the week and stop your work and focus on me. But he also knows that humans need time to rest and relax, time to remember, and time to reflect and refocus. We can't just work all the time. It's not healthy. It's a time, it's a reminder that it's God that sustains us and not the work of our hands. So there are two main Hebrew words used for rest in the Bible. The first is Shabbat, which gets partially translated into the English word Sabbath. And Shabbat simply means to stop working. So it's like clocking out at the end of your shift. The work is done, and that's Shabbat. And then the other Hebrew word for rest is nuach, and that means to dwell or settle. And so this is not the same as clocking out from work. This is a type of rest. This is my favorite type of rest because it's like sitting in front of the fireplace with a book that you want to read, or unpacking your suitcase on a vacation. It's you're kind of settling, you're dwelling, or doing something that brings you rest. So you've got Shabbat, which means to stop working, and Nuach, which means to dwell or settle. So this is Zion National Park, and I recently went on a trip with my dad and brother to Utah, and we toured a lot of the national parks. And for me, this is my rest. And so, for a week, I clocked out of work, and we flew to out west, and we jumped in a Jeep, and we drove to these national parks. And my dad, my brother, and I started hiking this trail. You can kind of see the trail off to the left, and you'll see that river right there is the Virgin River, and it's snow melt that comes down from the mountains in Utah and runs down through this canyon in Zion National Park. And up there on the top, you'll see like a peak, and that's Angel's Landing, and that's a trail that we were going to hike. And so we started hiking up. And it's not a long trail, but it's very, very steep up to that point. And so we started hiking. And as we're hiking, you can see the sun start to rise over into the canyon and brings light down into there. And I thought, with that view right there, I thought, man, this has got to be like the Garden of Eden or something. In my mind, there's the river running down the middle and the greenery on the bottom, and the cliffs. I just thought it was beautiful. And so then we began our march up. And if you look at the picture on the left, you see the trail kind of winding, and then it starts going on these switchbacks up the side of the cliff. And that's a picture of my dad there on the right, hiking up the trail that is cut into the side of the cliff. And then you get to almost to the top, and you're really tired, and you've been going on all these switchbacks, and you come to this place called Walter's Wiggles. And Walter's Wiggles is what you see here. These switchbacks that go straight up the cliff. And it's exhausting, but it's really neat. So when we got to the top of those wiggles, then you have a decision to make. You can either stop there and enjoy the view that you have, or you can go further up to Angel's Landing, which requires going up on that camelback portion, which is really dangerous because you could fall off at either side. And so I'm standing next to a sign there that's got a picture of a hiker falling off as a warning. So my brother, who's 14 years younger than me, and he and I went. My dad decided to rest. He decided to stay there and wait. So he enjoyed his rest at that point, and me and my younger brother, we went on and hiked to the end. And as you're hiking there, you'll see these chains. And the only thing between you and certain death are these chains that you can hold on to as you hike. And so it was pretty neat, but you really have to pay attention. And as we went up that ridge up there in the background, it's a full body climb. You're almost climbing like a ladder on these rocks, and you really have to pay attention, and it's a workout. Of course, we went in July. And as we were going, I stopped 1 second and I looked down and I saw these California condors floating around below us. And they were way up in the sky, but we were looking down on them as they were floating around. So it's kind of neat to hike up to a point where you're looking down on the birds. And so that's Angel's Landing. And when my brother and I, when we got there and we settled down on that rock and we had lunch, that was like my rest. So I don't know if that's the kind of rest they're talking about, but just to sit on that spot for a little while and eat lunch with my brother and look at the creation around me, it was pretty magical. And to think about that canyon and how it was formed probably during the flood, and just the creation, that's my rest. Now, other people, this would not be something that some people would like to do. This might be your worst nightmare, but for me, this was my rest. For you, it may be something else. But we need that. We need to take off work. We need to do things where we can focus on our family and on what's important, God, creation, and things like that. And it's really good for us to stop working and to focus. So back to my lesson here. In Genesis 2, at the very beginning, God introduces Shabbat from his work. So God clocks out after he creates the earth. He stops working and he rests. And then a few verses later, in Genesis 2:15, God introduces us to Nuach when he settles man in the Garden of Eden with him. So the literary structure communicates a link between the concepts of Shabbat and Nuach. They're connected. So God leads by example as he rests from the work and then dwells with his people. So as we keep reading and studying, we can see the nation of Israel reject God's design for rest repeatedly. They worship false gods, they ignore his instructions, they rebel in almost every possible way. But despite this, God finds a way to rest. He dwells He dwells his presence with them through the tabernacle and then later the temple. So let's talk about Jesus and the Sabbath. So Jesus had a lot to say about the Sabbath and the true rest that God intends for humanity. In his gospel, we see a series of connected stories where Jesus is confronted by Israel's religious leaders and teachers. On one Sabbath day, the leaders object to Jesus' disciples picking corn as they're walking through a field. And then they also object to Jesus healing a man's shriveled hand. Matthew 12:9 through 14, saying that Jesus is ignoring the command to keep the Sabbath found in Exodus. So Jesus responds with an argument that clarifies the true definition of the Sabbath, asserting his role as the promised Messiah and pointing to his divinity. Let's read Matthew 12:3 through 8 and see what he says. Matthew 12:3 through 8. He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." So Jesus understood the heart of the Sabbath, and he tried to explain that he was the Sabbath and that he is bigger than the Sabbath because he is the Sabbath. So to understand Jesus' point, we have to kind of look back at the context there with which Matthew placed these stories. So Matthew records the Sabbath controversies immediately after quoting Jesus' words about rest. So Matthew 11:28 and 29 says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." So Jesus tells them how to find true rest, and then they go on and try to outsmart him and try to make him out to look like a hypocrite. But he's not buying it. He's not fooled by it, and doesn't quite work. So Jesus reminds the people of God's original intent for the Sabbath: unity with God, creation, and each other. Jesus teaches that the Sabbath points to him, the one Israel's prophets promised would come to mercifully restore the rhythm of all creation. So all that that we read in Jeremiah and Isaiah and all. He is the rest. And as modern-day Christians, we aren't bound by the law of Moses, but we need to take a break from the hustle and hardship to set aside time to honor Jesus, enjoy his presence, and extend rest to the world around us. And when we trust God's invitation to come to him and truly rest, we become places where his presence can dwell. I know that's a lot on there at one time, but I'm not good at condensing things down. So Sabbath rest is an invitation to practice for eternity in God's presence. It is an act of regular and intentional trust of God's rule on earth, which is, I think, what the gentleman here was saying a second ago. We Shabbat in order to walk. When we stop working, we can truly rest in God's presence. When we practice this purposeful pause, we make room for God to take up residence in our individual lives and community. So that the taking up and pausing, it makes room. We shove out all the junk in our lives and we make room for him to be within us. So to conclude, who is our Sabbath rest today? Who is our Sabbath? Jesus. And why should we rest? Right? To make time for him, to focus on God. Will we be put to death if we don't take off work on Saturday? I hope not. I've worked a lot of Saturdays, so I hope I don't get stoned for that. So any thoughts or comments on the Sabbath? I hope I made it clear. I didn't want to go too deep into the rules and regulations and all that, but talk about what Jesus means to us. Jesus is our Sabbath today for us as Christians, no matter what day it is. And we worship on Sunday, the first day of the week. And we partake of the Lord's Supper, where we pause together as a group and we remember the death of Christ. And we do that weekly. But if Jesus is supposed to dwell within us and be with us, then we need to have a Sabbath on a regular occasion. No matter what day it is, we need to reflect and pause and remember and even find your own mountaintop or cliff top to reflect on, so to speak. So any comment? Yes, sir.
So is this rest that you're talking about, or this Sabbath, is it also a shadow of the ultimate rest that heaven is?
Yes. He asked if it's a shadow of what heaven is, and I think that's what the gentleman here was trying to say, that we take time to pause here on earth and reflect about God, so that when we're in heaven, it's not going to be a new process for us. It's we're going to be dwelling with him for eternity in heaven, and if you can't do that on earth, you're not going to be able to do it in heaven. So we've got to be able to do it here so that we can do it there too.
So the Sabbath essentially is describing heaven as, at least one component of it, as a eternal rest.
Yes, heaven is an eternal rest. We're going to talk a little bit about some more of that stuff here in a second. Right. Right.
I just know for myself, it's very easy to feel like Sundays are I give this day to God, and then the other 6 I kind of do my own thing. But in the minor prophets, they Sabbath wrong because they still didn't have the actions that lined up. So it's, not something that carried over into the new law, but a principle that still should be beneficial for us.
Right. And you can't go out and do whatever you want all week long and sin and worship other gods and then take off on the Sabbath and call it good. But yeah, our Sabbath rest needs to be within us and carried with us as we go about our daily lives. All right. Any other comments before I move on? All right. So we're going to talk about Noah for a second. The name Noah in Hebrew is also Nuach, what I've been saying, that weird word, Nuach. It means rest. So Noah's name means rest. I didn't realize that. I hadn't heard that. But there are many moments in the Bible where rest is integral to the story. But Noah and the ark should be considered one of the most interesting. Noah's story embraced the theme of rest without coming out and directly saying it. So it's not really a story about rest, but it kind of is. So Noah worked hard to prepare the ark. So you think about all the hard work that went into the ark. He didn't have power tools. He didn't have construction equipment. So that took a lot of work. And then he had 40 days to rest, floating on the flooded planet to prepare for the new world. Now I'm hoping the guys on his family on the ark with him helped him take care of these animals. Because if you've ever taken care of animals, that's a lot of work. So I'm not sure about that. But if you're floating for 40 days, just drifting on a boat, maybe he had some time to reflect. And in his efforts to determine if his quarantine was over, he sent out a dove to look for dry land. So notice the connection between rest and yet again the number 7. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 8, starting in verse 4. Genesis 8 and verse 4. In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. And then down to verse 8. Then he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. So she returned to him into the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. So he waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. Then he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again. So the dove found a permanent place to rest, and she stayed where she had landed. And in a beautiful turn of events, it was a dove that rested upon Jesus when he rose up from his baptism. So we know there's a connection in the Bible on the flood and with the baptism being buried and raised. And so, when Jesus rose up from his baptism and God spoke from the heavens and relayed his contentment, Matthew 3, 16 and 17. I'm going to read that. Matthew 3, 16 and 17. After being baptized, Jesus came up immediately from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending as a dove and resting on him. And behold, a voice out of the heavens said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." So the idea of resting is laying your whole weight down. So Noah sent the dove out to see if there was land worthy to settle on, and the dove came back with an olive branch as a sign of hope. Noah sent the dove out, and she did not return, so she had found a resting place. And when the dove rested and put her full weight on Jesus at his baptism, it was like the promise of hope. He was the olive branch, the one on which the dove rested, and the one who would bring great peace. Jesus was the rest that the whole world needed. So I think that's really neat the connection between the flood and Jesus' baptism. Any thoughts on that? It's pretty neat how rest gets intertwined into all that. Okay. All right, there's several verses about the foretelling of Christ that also mention rest. So for a moment, let's look at a few passages where the coming Messiah is referred to. So in Isaiah 11:10, in that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. And then Jeremiah 6:16. This is what the Lord says, stand at the crossroads and look, ask for the ancient paths, ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. And then Jeremiah 30 and Jeremiah 46, these two verses are pretty much identical. But he says, then fear not, O Jacob, my servant, declares the Lord, nor be dismayed, O Israel, for behold, I will save you from far away, and your offspring from the land of their captivity. Jacob shall return and have quiet and ease, and none shall make him afraid. And so there we have some words to describe rest. We have quiet and ease and not being afraid. So those are some things to think about when we're thinking about rest. We need to have quiet, and it needs to be easy, and we should not be in fear. So the idea of rest in Jesus came not only from creation and Moses' law, but also from the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah. And the promise of rest in the Old Testament is also tied to a place, Canaan. The promised land was called the resting place. So reading Deuteronomy 12, 9 through 10. Deuteronomy 12, 9 through 10. For you have not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance that the Lord your God is giving you. But when you go over the Jordan and live in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and when he gives you rest from all your enemies around, so that you live in safety. So Canaan is the promised land, the resting place. And that also ties in to our thoughts about heaven as a resting place. And safety is mentioned along with rest here as well. And so with the word safety in mind, what is another type of rest? When you think of the word rest and safety. We talk about it in reference to Christmas sometimes. Peace on earth. We want peace. And so when we're thinking about rest, a lot of times God used safety and peace as a way of providing rest. All right, all throughout Judges and the kingdoms, rest from enemies is a common theme. So let's look at 2 Samuel 7, 10 and 11. 2 Samuel 7, 10 and 11. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel and will plant them so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly. From the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. So with God we can have peace. Despite the world around us and all that's going on with sin that tries to separate us from God, we need peace and rest from our busy lives. And then we need rest in times of hardship and grief. So that's something that everybody at some point is going to go through hardship in their lives. And Job was a good example of that. Look at Job 3, 11 through 13 and 24 through 26. So Job 3, he says, why did I not die at birth, come forth from the womb and expire? For now I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept then. I would have been at rest. For my groaning comes at the sight of my food, and my cries pour out like water. For what I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet, and I am not at rest, but turmoil comes. So when Job's going through his hard times, extremely hard times, he is not at rest. He's not at ease. He's not quiet. And so for Job, death would have given him the rest he needed, is what he kind of was thinking. And this is how so many people across the globe feel. Those that struggle with thoughts of suicide, they're always weighing whether or not life is worth living. And the pain of constant restlessness may cause some to come to the conclusion that life isn't worth the struggle. But was death the only pathway to real rest and healing? Was there any other way to achieve rest with so much pain and turmoil? Was just laying one's head down and dying the only unfailing cure for restlessness? I think a lot of people believe that. I think they think that because they don't have God in their lives and they don't have the rest that we're talking about. For Job and many others, dying seemed like a quick relief in that moment. So we need to have rest in our lives so that we can get through these hard times and realize that we have the peace that passes all understanding and the peace and the rest from turmoil in our lives. And then there's no rest in captivity. In Lamentations 1 verse 3, so Judah had gone into exile because of affliction and hard servitude. She dwells now among the nations, but finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. So Jerusalem became a captive and a slave by reason of the greatness of her sins, and had no rest from suffering. So there's an example of when you're in captivity, it's hard to find rest. So from the beginning of time, with the creation of the world by God, we learn about the importance of rest. And so I kind of thought about some words that we've talked about tonight and kind of explained. And these are what I came up with, things that we need to be thinking about in terms of rest. And so is there any other words or thoughts that you might think about that would tie into this? Anything that I'm missing? I'm sorry? Heaven. That's a good one. Should have had that one there too. What else?
You can delete words like fear.
Yeah?
If you're under captivity and you're a slave, you don't have control of your life. And when you have God as your leader, you've got all control.
Right.
If you be obedient.
So he said you can delete words like fear, hardship, turmoil, things like that when you have God and true rest. Thank you. Yes.
I don't know if this is one, but meditation,
Yeah.
where you meditate on God and His Word and what all He's done for us to give us peace.
Yeah, meditation, definitely. I put focus up there kind of along that line, but yeah, definitely meditation. So these are all words to describe taking the time out of our busy lives to find true wellness. Yeah? Yeah. Well, when I rest, part of it is that I'm relaxing, rejuvenating, but definitely the reminder of our home in heaven should be comforting. It should help us to relax during hard times.
Well, this kind of gets away from that a little bit. I don't know how everyone in here sees heaven and rest. As the discussion's been, we've looked at rest mainly as inactivity, and I obviously only know part of what the scripture has to say about heaven. I think there will be activity in heaven.
Yeah.
So, some of those things would be without any activity. Because when we want to rest, as you've described it today, we don't want to do anything. And if that's what we're looking forward to in heaven, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think I'm trying to make the point of sitting on the couch eating potato chips. But I'm trying to just say that we need to stop from our busy lives and focus and take some time. And
That's here, I'm talking about in heaven.
yeah, in heaven, we praising God, and
It's an activity,
it is an activity.
for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and like my story of hiking up Angel's Landing, that was definitely an activity, but it brought me rest. Now, maybe not, my legs were tired, I was exhausted at the end, but it brought me rest. So, hope that makes sense.
I see kind of opposites here. Rest is because you're resting from your work. So what's our work here on earth? To spread the gospel. We get to heaven, there's no need to spread the gospel because we're there. So we're resting from that work and that labor that we're
Right.
supposed to be doing here on earth.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So he said that heaven is supposed to be a rest from our work and our deeds on earth. We're here to seek and save the lost. And so after we do that, it says, let's see here. Yeah, I skipped a little bit, but I'm trying to go to his point. It says, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. So with Christ, we receive rest while here on earth. When we take time to remember our Father and remain faithful to Him, then in death we are blessed with the rest with God from our labors. And then back to Hebrews 4. Hebrews 4, I'm going to read verses 9 through 11. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works, as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter the rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. So we need to, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. So we need to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing here on earth, serving God, so that we will have that rest and we won't be considered disobedient.
So what does it mean when it says to enter that rest? What is that? Because
Enter the rest of Jesus.
where it says that let us therefore strive to enter that rest.
So he's asking what that means to enter the rest.
See, Hebrews 4 is not that easy of a chapter to
No, it's not. So, we have the promise of entering his rest as believers, and those who formerly received the good news, they failed to enter the rest because of disobedience. So I believe that's the point I was trying to make, that if we're disobedient, we won't be able to enter the rest. I see that as heaven on one hand, but also being with God on earth, and the peace that comes with that.
So if that's the case, then the key part of the rest is dwelling with God, which, if you look at Hebrews 4, seems to be indicated that you can do both. You can have rest now, or spiritual rest now, and you can can also lose the opportunity to have a spiritual rest, but you can also have it
Yeah.
in heaven.
Yeah, so he's saying that you can have rest now on earth, but also in heaven. And that's kind of the point I was trying to make as well, but I probably didn't do a great job of that. So Matthew 11:28, a little reminder, is Jesus where he says, "Come to me, all who labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And that's the verse that really threw them off after all those years of obeying the Sabbath. And this guy comes along and says, "Come to me, I'm the one that's going to give you rest." And I guess that threw them off quite a bit. But it's comforting to know that our true rest is waiting for us after all the trials and tribulations are over. You know, when our health fails, when our relationships fails, our government will fail, and when there's no peace to be found, Christians can rest with the Father in good times and in bad times. And when our day comes to die, we will rest with him eternally in absolute peace. I think about attending a funeral. You know, you attend a funeral of a Christian. It can be a celebration because you know that they entered into their rest for their labors on earth. And so that's what gives us peace when our loved ones pass, is that we can remember that, you know, they're going to receive the gift of heaven. So I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you so much. Hope you got something out of it.